I never thought silence could taste so bitter. That night on Thanksgiving, the golden light above my daughter's dining room shimmered across polished wood, crystal glasses, and porcelain plates stacked high with food I had not served myself. The table stretched longer than I could remember any family table being, crowded with aromas of roasted turkey, garlic mashed potatoes, and cranberry sauce glistening like rubies under candlelight. And yet, in front of me, my plate sat empty. I had chosen it that way. Not because I wasn't hungry, not because I had lost my appetite, but because something inside me refused to reach for food I hadn't been invited to touch. Everyone else had been served first. My son-in-law, carving turkey with the precision of a surgeon, his voice booming as though he owned not only the food, but the very air in the room. When he noticed my plate, bare and waiting, he leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "A feast fit for royalty, and yet not everyone can keep up," he said, his laughter echoing through the room. Some chuckled politely, others shifted uncomfortably. I felt heat rush to my ears, but I didn't move. My fork rested like a useless ornament beside porcelain whiteness, and his laughter pierced deeper than any insult spoken aloud. I tried to swallow the shame, but it stayed lodged in my throat. My daughter, seated across the table, caught my eyes. For a moment, her smile faltered. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on her wine glass, trembled, and then, without warning, she stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor, the sound cutting through the laughter. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling before she could hold them back. "Stop it," she whispered, voice shaking but audible enough that the room froze. "Just stop." Her words left us suspended between silence and explosion. I could feel every heartbeat in my chest, as if the house itself had stopped breathing. What could possibly make her cry like that, at her own Thanksgiving table, with her husband at her side? Her tears fell faster than words could form. The sound of forks clinking against porcelain ceased, as though a conductor had cut the music mid-note. Even the candles seemed to burn lower, their flames bending with the weight of her trembling voice. I wanted to reach out to her, to close the distance across that endless table, but my hands felt bound by invisible chains. My daughter, my Evelyn, stood in front of everyone, her shoulders hunched, lips quivering as though every truth she had buried was clawing its way out. Her husband, my son-in-law Martin, shifted in his seat. He tried to laugh as though to dissolve the moment. "Honey, it was a joke, just a joke." His words floated shallow, insincere, falling flat against the silence that now swallowed the room. But Evelyn didn't sit back down. Her chest rose and fell as though she were fighting the air itself. She turned her eyes on him, sharp, wet, wounded. "Do you think everything is a joke?" she asked. Her voice cracked. Martin stiffened, his smile faltering, the edges of his carefully groomed confidence unraveling. Around us, other guests shifted uncomfortably, friends of theirs, acquaintances of wealth and position. They looked everywhere but at me. My empty plate had become a spotlight, and now her tears illuminated truths none of them had prepared to witness. I felt the old ache stir in my chest, the ache of not belonging, of being the outsider in my own daughter's world. I was her mother, yet somewhere along the line, she had built her life in walls I couldn't pass. A mansion, money, status, a marriage I had never fully understood. All of it had carried her into a universe where I was tolerated but never quite welcomed. And now, as she stood crying in front of her guests, it seemed as if those walls were beginning to crack. She pressed her hands flat against the table, staring at her untouched food, and whispered, "Do you even see what you've done?" Her words weren't aimed at me, though I felt them ricochet through my own body. They were aimed at him, at Martin, at the man who had laughed at my empty plate as though hunger was something to mock. I tried to speak, to soften the storm before it tore the evening apart. But the lump in my throat tightened, and all I managed was a shallow inhale that trembled into the silence. Martin reached for her wrist, but she pulled back, flinching as though his touch burned. The room inhaled collectively. No one dared exhale. "Evelyn," he said, quieter now, his jaw tightening. "You're making a scene." Her laugh came bitter, broken. "No, Martin, you did that." The words hung there like smoke, seeping into the corners of the room, into the folds of every napkin, into the trembling of every untouched fork. I could see something unraveling inside her, something years in the making. And I wondered, was this the moment she would finally reveal what I had only suspected in silence? I could hear the heater humming through the vents, a steady breath that made the dining room feel like a stage set, the air just warm enough to keep everyone polite. I kept my hands folded in my lap, so no one would notice the thin red thread around my wrist, the braided bracelet my daughter tied for me on a spring afternoon when she was 7, standing barefoot at Montrose Beach and promising, "This is our anchor, Mom, we won't drift." It has faded to the color of old apples frayed near the knot. I never take it off, not for showers, not for doctors, not for holidays where laughter turns into a blade. Across the table, Evelyn's mouth trembled. Her mascara rimmed her eyes like a bruise she didn't deserve. She looked at me as if trying to say something with just breath and blinking. I knew that language. We learned it in the years when we had no money for anything but kindness and a winter coat we shared between us. Me in the mornings to catch 2 buses to the hospital laundry, her at night for choir practice, cheeks red from the wind off the lake. I learned early that hunger wears a lot of disguises. It sounds like an empty pantry. It also sounds like a joke told loudly enough to force people to swallow their shame. Martin cleared his throat, polishing his wedding band with a cloth napkin as though the gold needed to remember it was expensive. "Let's not ruin the evening," he said. "We have guests." Guests, neighbors from their cul-de-sac in Evanston, a partner from his investment firm, a couple who talked about Aspen as if it were a shared nursery rhyme. Their coats slept in a room upstairs, their shoes in tidy rows near the marble entryway. Everything in this house had a place, except my dignity, apparently. I looked down at my plate, at the way the white reflected the chandelier, and I thought of the envelope in my coat pocket. Brown, unassuming, sealed with tape that had lost its stick over the years. It smelled faintly of cedar. I had slipped it into my pocket before walking in, fingers shaking like I was carrying contraband. The writing across the front was my mother's, tidy and unwavering, for Evelyn, to be opened by her alone. I have carried that envelope for 1.5 years, since the funeral, since the last time we stood together as 3 women in a pew and sang words about mercy I could not make myself believe. It was the one thing my mother left that I could not bring myself to deliver. Not because I wanted to keep anything from my daughter. I would give her my lungs if she needed them, but because I was afraid the past inside that paper would turn us all to salt. "Mom," Evelyn whispered across the table, barely sound at all. My name is Nora, but she has always called me Mom like a prayer. "Are you okay?" Her question grazed the surface of everything unsaid. I pressed my palms against my skirt. The bracelet caught on the fabric and tugged. "Eat," I said, the word smaller than I intended. "Enjoy your guests." She shook her head. "This isn't enjoyment." I remember the first Thanksgiving after she married him, the way I walked into their brand new house with a store-bought pie because my oven had died, and how the smell of pine cleaner and citrus felt like walking into a magazine. Martin had kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Don't worry, Nora. You don't have to bring anything. You're the guest now," as though generosity were a trophy he had won. But I never asked to be a guest in my daughter's life. I wanted to be her mother. A sound came from the kitchen, ceramic knocking against granite, then a quick, muffled hush of voices. Evelyn flinched. Her hand went to her chest like she was checking if her heart was still there. She sat back down slowly, as if the chair might buck her off, and reached for her napkin. Her fingers couldn't find the corner. I wanted to do everything. Wipe her tears. Shield her from these people who smiled with their teeth and not their eyes. Take her hand under the table like when she was 9 and afraid of thunderstorms. "You are overreacting," Martin said with a smile meant to dissolve her. It was a joke and everyone got it. I felt the envelope against my ribs like a second heartbeat. My mother's voice was buried in that paper, I was sure of it. Her peculiar honesty, the kind that never apologized for being true even when it hurt. She had loved Evelyn quietly, the way she always loved, through cornbread warm from the oven, by teaching her the names of birds on winter weeks when the city seemed to be only salt and grey. That envelope carried something my daughter needed, The problem was that it also carried something I feared would divide us. My water glass left a circle on the table when I lifted it. I took a sip, and the ice clinked and the room seemed to lean in. "Evelyn," I said, forcing my voice to steady, "after dinner I would like to give you—" "No," she cut in, too quickly, eyes widening. She glanced toward the archway to the foyer, toward the coat closet where I had slipped my jacket. "Not here." How did she know? Had I telegraphed it with my hands, the way I carry guilt like a suitcase? Martin noticed her look. "What is it?" he asked, curiosity sliding across his face like a shadow. "What would you like to give our Evelyn, Nora?" The room went very quiet. I watched the chandelier flame tremble. I felt my bracelet dig into my skin. I knew I had reached the hinge between what we had been and what we would become. "Just something from my mother," I said. "Nothing for discussion." "Oh," he said brightly, "a family trinket." He raised his glass. "By all means, share." Evelyn's chair scraped again, softer this time. She shook her head with a small, fierce motion. "Please, Mom," she whispered, "don't let him make a show of it." But the show had already begun, and I no longer knew whether I could stop it, because the envelope in my pocket had begun to burn. I did not stand, I did not make speeches, I did not reach for drama with both hands. I placed my palms flat on the table and let the cool wood anchor me while I breathed and counted everything I could see. 12 wine glasses, a gravy boat shaped like a swan, a bowl of Brussels sprouts glistening with oil, 3 heavy candlesticks that had traveled without a scratch from an antique shop in Lake Forest to this gleaming room. I used to count like that during my shifts in the hospital laundry. Count sheets, count towels, count breaths between coughs through the swinging doors. Counting made me feel like there was order under the mess, even when there wasn't enough money in my wallet for the bus home, and I had to walk the last mile. "I'll give it to her later," I said, aiming for calm, for grown-up, for the kind of voice that makes people stay seated. Martin smiled at the guests, faceless and watchful. "She is sentimental," he announced, as if that were a diagnosis. "We indulge that in this family." She. Not my name, not Nora. She. Evelyn's eyes flicked to the centerpiece, a low arrangement of white roses and eucalyptus. She had arranged centerpieces with me as a girl, using whatever we could find in the grocery store discount bin, carnations with petals too tired for anyone else to want them. She used to talk to the flowers while she worked. "You're still beautiful," she would say. "You just need someone to notice." In the kitchen, the oven beeped. Someone laughed too loudly in the hallway, the way people laugh when they feel trapped and need noise to break the glass. I could feel the envelope against my side like a stone I had to carry up a hill. My mother, the original Evelyn, whose name my daughter bears, had held truths like coins she kept in the same drawer for decades. She had never learned to speak softly. Yet when she died, the loudest thing she left me was sealed silence, to be opened by her alone. I wasn't ready to explain it all in front of the people who knew my daughter through holiday parties and a book club where no one finished the books. So I did the only thing that felt honest. I picked up my fork and served myself 2 careful slices of turkey. The meat was moist, the knife marks precise. I added a spoonful of potatoes and a ribbon of cranberry, placing each thing as if arranging a small garden. I felt Martin watching me. "There she goes," he said. Relief performed for the table. "A little late to the party, but we'll take it." The words pricked my skin, but I put food in my mouth and I chewed and I tasted salt and butter and the faint metallic tang of shame. Across from me, my daughter sat very still. When I looked up, she was already watching. "I remember," she said softly, "the year we couldn't afford a turkey." I nodded once. "Cornbread and black beans," I said, "and butternut squash that we roasted on low to save the gas. You made it feel like a feast." "It was one," I whispered. Her eyes glistened. The room grew distant, like we were on a quiet street 2 blocks away, stepping over patches of ice, sharing a scarf between us. And then Martin snapped his fingers, 2 bright sounds that brought the table back into focus. "Toasts," he said. "It is Thanksgiving, after all." He stood. He is tall enough that standing becomes a kind of punctuation. Cameras love men like him. News articles love his kind of smile. He lifted his glass and looked first at me. I could see the angle of his jaw from where I sat. It looked cut from something that never softened. "I am grateful," he began, "for abundance, for the life we have built, for the opportunities this great country affords those who are willing to seize them." The words shimmered. They could have been drawn from any year, any gala. He turned slightly toward my daughter. "And of course for my wife, who has exquisite taste and a generous heart, and who will one day, God willing, make a wonderful mother." The last phrase landed in my chest like a dropped dish. Evelyn's breath hitched. Her hand tightened around her glass until I could see the white crescents of her nails. I knew then that my daughter was keeping a grief I had not been invited to hold. The room waited for a neat end to the toast. In the pause, I heard my mother's voice in my head. "Do not let him narrate your life for you." But my throat closed and the envelope at my side became heavier, as if soaked. Martin raised his glass higher. "And for family, old and new," he said, eyes sliding back to me. "May we all learn when to accept a good thing." Evelyn set her glass down too firmly. The base clinked. She looked at me, then at him, then at the door to the foyer, as if calculating distance. The partner from the firm murmured something to his wife. A guest coughed into a linen napkin. The swan-shaped gravy boat winked under the light like it had heard everything and would remember it forever. I thought I could swallow the night. I thought I could keep the envelope sealed until after dessert and place it quietly into my daughter's hands at the door, whispering, "For later, for when you're alone." But the weight of it was starting to bend my spine, and Evelyn's eyes looked like a storm pressing against glass. "Mom," she said, voice ragged, "tell them why you didn't eat." "Because I promised myself I would stop taking what is not offered," I wanted to say. "Because your husband's charity always arrives with a string I cannot untie. Because there is a legacy in my pocket that doesn't belong to his performance, and I am terrified of what it will mean." Instead, I opened my mouth and the doorbell rang. The sound of the doorbell felt almost obscene, a cheerful little chime in a room that had lost all its color. Heads turned in unison, like we were tethered to the same wire. Martin's jaw tightened at the interruption. The partner from the firm checked his watch as if the bell could be scheduled. Evelyn's fingers slipped from her glass, and she inhaled as though the arrival of some unknown visitor might be an answer. "Who is that?" he asked no one, already annoyed. "Probably the neighbor," someone offered. "She said she'd drop off the pecan pie." Evelyn's head shook with a tiny movement I would have missed if I didn't know every version of her face. I knew dread when I saw it. She was bracing. Martin stepped away from the table, a man reclaiming his stage. He disappeared into the hall. The light there is brighter, almost clinical. I heard the door open, voices fuse, and then a woman's soft apology. Shoes on the tile, 2 sets. Evelyn's gaze pinned me. She mouthed, "Please." I didn't know what she was begging for. Perhaps for me not to speak. Perhaps to carry her out of the room without the burden of an explanation. I cupped my water glass in both hands to keep them from shaking. The red thread bracelet itched. When Martin returned, he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a woman with her coat still on, hair scraped into a bun that meant business rather than style. She carried a slim folder under one arm. The neighbor with the pecan pie followed, flustered, pie still warm and covered in foil, clearly regretting her timing. "I'm so sorry," the neighbor said, looking from face to face. "She was on my porch and asked where the Whitmore house was, and, well, I didn't want to send her to the wrong place." Whitmore, his surname, not the one my daughter was born with. The woman with the bun nodded once professionally. "Mr. Whitmore. Ms. Whitmore. Mrs. She looked to me. "Calloway," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Nora Calloway." "I'm Alison Tate," she said, "from the clinic." Whatever color was left in Evelyn's face vanished. She stood so fast her chair tipped. Martin set the chair upright with one hand, his smile back brittle. "This is not appropriate," he began. "You can't just... This is our home." "I tried your office," Alison said, polite but immovable. "And your assistant confirmed you were hosting, Ms. Whitmore hasn't been returning our calls." Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth. Tears gathered again, but she fought them like someone trained in holding composure too long. "I told you I needed time," she whispered. The room, which had been politely curious, tightened into discomfort. Conversations clipped themselves short. The partner from the firm studied his glass the way one studies a painting to avoid the people in it. I felt the shape of the evening rearrange itself around a truth I had not been meant to hear tonight. A clinic. Calls unreturned. Time needed. My daughter's body had carried something and released it back into the silent place where love goes when it never learns a name. I knew the math without being told. I felt it like a bruise in my own abdomen. Martin stepped between the woman and the table, commanding again. "Whatever this is, it can wait until Monday. You're intruding. We are with family." Alison's gaze moved to Evelyn gently, like a hand offered in the dark. "We wanted to make sure you received the results," she said. "And the note from Dr. Greeley. There are next steps." Evelyn's breath made a small sound. She nodded, then shook her head, then pressed her lips together like they might split. "I can call," she said. "I promise." "Tomorrow," Martin cut in. "She'll call tomorrow." He guided Alison toward the door with a hand that looked courteous and felt like a removal. The envelope in my pocket grew hot. Inside it, a key slid against paper. I knew exactly how it felt. I have turned it in my palm 100 times in the dark, wondering if I was a terrible mother for delaying, or a decent one for waiting until I understood what it might change. Alison hesitated. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "I'm sorry for your loss." There it was, the word that doesn't belong on holiday tables or in brightly lit foyers, or in the mouth of a woman holding a folder while the good silver waits to be used. It fell into the room like a stone in water, ripples reaching the edges, touching everyone. The neighbor backed up so quickly her elbow knocked the doorframe. The pie tilted, writes itself, a save so small and human that I wanted to cry for no reason except that things fall, and sometimes we catch them. Evelyn swayed. I was on my feet before I knew I had moved. My napkin slid to the floor with a whisper. "Honey," I said, the word a warm corner. "Let me—" Martin raised a palm at me, a signal to stop like I was a car rolling too close. "She's fine." Evelyn's head turned toward me with an ache I could taste. "I am not fine," she said, and the sound of it broke the candles in half. She looked at her husband. "I am not a press release, Martin." Alison offered a card and a thin piece of paper folded once. Evelyn took them with shaking hands. The fold line made a pale ridge. "Thank you," she whispered. The door closed behind the clinic woman. The neighbor fled with quiet apologies, promising to bring the pie by another time, another day, another world. The silence that followed had shape and temperature. It was the silence before a storm finds your street. Martin turned to his guests with a laugh that wasn't a laugh. "Well," he said, "medical people always on schedule." He lifted his glass. "To resilience." No one toasted. The candles burned down another breath, and my daughter looked at me with the eyes she used to have at 5 years old when she woke from a nightmare and didn't know if she was still inside it. "Mom," she said, voice no longer steady, "what did Grandma leave me?" Her question was a bell rung in the smallest chapel of my chest. Everyone could feel the vibration, even if they did not know the prayer. I reached for the back of my chair as if furniture could hold up a woman like me. "It can wait," I said. "It was never meant for an audience." "I don't care," Evelyn answered, the words stripped of the varnish she gives guests. "I want to know now." Martin's smile pinched. "Evelyn." She took a breath that gathered every shard of the evening and made something out of them. "No. I am done being announced and redirected." She looked at me. "Please." This is the part where some mothers are brave and others are not. I have tried to be both for so long, protective and honest, patient and urgent, that my body has learned to live at cross purposes. I dug my hand into my coat pocket, felt the cut of paper against my fingers, and closed around the envelope. I placed it on the table between plates of food that were quickly going cold. The brown looked homely beside the gleam. I smoothed the wrinkled corner with my thumb. "Your grandmother wrote your name on it," I said softly. She did not tell me what was inside, only that I should give it to you myself. No mail, no intermediaries. Martin cleared his throat. We can read it later. It is not for we, I said, surprising even myself with the steel in my words. It is for her. The room remembered how to inhale. Evelyn reached out but stopped, as if touching the envelope might break her skin. Why didn't you give it to me sooner? The question I had asked myself at every traffic light for 18 months. I could have said, grief makes time misshapen. I could have said, I was afraid. I could have said, I wanted to wait for a day when you would hear it as love and not as another thing you had to manage. Instead, I told the truth, that is plain and not always pretty. Because your husband asked me not to, I said. The fork dropped from someone's hand. A guest sucked in air. Martin's smile cracked down the middle. I asked you not to, what? His voice found metal. Not to bring surprises, I answered, eyes steady on his. Not to bring the past into the present without a schedule. Not to embarrass anyone. Your exact phrase was, we do not need your history here. Evelyn's gaze snapped to him so fast I felt wind. You said that. He rolled his shoulders with the ease of a man who has never had to apologize for a chair that was not offered. I said that our lives are complicated enough. I did not want your mother's relics to become burdens. Relics. As if my mother's handwriting and the cedar smell that clung to her sweater were stones sinking us all. Evelyn picked up the envelope. Her fingers shook at the edges. She slid a nail under the flap, careful not to tear the letters of her name. The room leaned forward. I wanted to cover her with my body, stand between her and every gaze. But she was not a child, and I could not shield her from consequence and revelation in the same breath. Inside was a key on a thin brass ring and a single page, folded into thirds. The key gleamed like something polished by winter light. Evelyn lifted the page. Her lips moved as she read, eyes skating the lines. The red of her lower lip brightened where her teeth pressed. What is it? Martin asked, already impatient with anything that required him to wait. Evelyn didn't answer. She read again, slower. Then she placed the letter flat on the table. Her palm hovered over the words like a blessing she could not find the courage to give. She left me something, she said finally. She swallowed. The cabin. My throat closed. My mother's cabin, the one we visited twice, once when I was 12 and once when Evelyn was 5, a summer so hot the lake felt like breath. A small weathered place in Michigan, near a narrow beach and a stand of birches that sounded like a paper being crumpled when the wind moved. My mother had kept it quietly, a retirement dream that never quite fit our pockets. The deed is in her safety box, Evelyn continued, voice thin but steadying. She transferred it to my name the month before she died. The note says, she stopped, eyes flicking to Martin, then back to me, that it is mine alone, not marital property, free of claim by any spouse present or future. A silence fell that wasn't just absence of sound, it was presence of everything real. Martin blinked. What? Evelyn's knuckles whitened on the edge of the table. She says I am to go there when I forget who I am. She says the key fits the back door because the front sticks. She says... Evelyn's voice faltered. She looked at me. She says I will know what to do with my life when all the voices go quiet. Martin laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. How quaint. A shack in the woods. This is what we are interrupting dinner for. The partner cleared his throat. The wife coughed. Someone reached for a roll and then changed their mind. The night had shifted onto a plane where bread could not fix anything. Evelyn lifted the key. It caught the light. It's not a shack. Semantics, he replied, already calculating, the way he calculates deals, risks, bodies. Real estate requires upkeep, taxes, management. We can talk to my guy and fold it into... No, she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The word sat in the center of the table and refused to move. You are not going to make financial decisions alone, he said, enunciating as though she had forgotten comprehension. We are married, Evelyn. Grandma made this decision, she said, holding his gaze. And she made it so I could make the next one without you. The room pulsed with the courage it takes to tell the truth with your eyes open. Martin's jaw flexed. I saw the version of him I had suspected for years, a man who loved the idea of a family that proved his virtue, but did not love the daily work of humility. He had not invented cruelty. He had simply learned to polish it. He leaned across the table and took the letter in his hand. "Give that back," I said. He held it over the candle for a beat too long, as if testing the heat. "No secrets," he said. "Not at my table." Evelyn rose, so quickly the chair toppled again. The candles flickered as if startled. She stared at the page in his hand, at her name written in a dead woman's careful strokes. Her voice found a register I had never heard, low, clear, unafraid. "Put it down," she said, "or I walk out of this house right now." The page hovered in the narrow space between flame and arrogance. Wax pooled around the base of the candle, translucent as skin. The lilies in the centerpiece had begun to open under the heat. Their perfume turned heavy, sweet enough to make breathing feel like work. Martin met her eyes and smiled like a poker player who knows he has a card you'll never see coming. He lowered the letter slowly onto the table. Not surrender, strategy. "Let's be reasonable," he said, reassembling charm like a man puts back on a jacket. "No one is leaving. It's a holiday." Evelyn didn't sit. She slipped the letter into the envelope with the key. Her hands were steady now. She placed both in her pocket and looked around the room, seeing faces she had curated for a life that fit in photographs. "I'm sorry to our guests," she said. "I need a moment with my mother." She stepped away from the table. I moved with her, the way you move in a tide you've always known would return. We reached the hallway, where the air is cooler and the sound of the dining room becomes memory. The coat closet door is white and glossy. I could smell peppermint from the bowl near the entry table. The houseplants in their ceramic pots looked well watered and unconcerned with human choices. "Breathe," I said, like I did when she was in labor with pain and promises, back when hope was simple and the body kept secrets kindly. She did, and the breath shook and then settled. "I lost the baby last month," she said without preface, because some truths only fit in a single sentence. "He wouldn't let me tell you. He said it would make a thing of it. He said we didn't need more grief-bringing." I put my palm on the side of her head the way my mother used to do for me. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "I am so sorry you carried that without me." "I thought," she said, voice breaking, "if I could keep it small it would hurt less. But it's like trying to hold breath underwater." We stood there, two women beside a bowl of peppermint and a basket of perfect shoes, and I felt the red thread bracelet against my wrist like a promise that had been stretched to transparency but not yet snapped. "I want to go to the cabin," she said suddenly, wiped clean by resolve. "I want to go tonight." "Now," I corrected gently. She nodded. "Now." In the dining room, someone laughed again out of habit, a sad little sound that didn't match anything. Martin's voice carried, warm and friendly, telling a story to fill the absence. The performance continues, I thought, even after the actors have left the stage. "We can leave," I said, "but understand, he will follow." "I know," she said, "but he won't know me there." A shadow moved along the wall, Martin's reflection without his body. He appeared a heartbeat later, hands in his pockets like he had strolled into the hallway for a glass of water. "And where," he asked lightly, "are my girls going?" Evelyn turned. "I'm going to the cabin." "Now?" He smiled, incredulous. "Don't be absurd. It's late. It's Michigan. It's mine," she said. He laughed softly and shook his head like a sad teacher. "We have responsibilities. You can't just run away." "I'm not running," she said. "I'm stepping aside." He looked at me as if I had orchestrated a mutiny. "You really never learned boundaries, did you, Nora?" "I learned," I said, "that a boundary is the courage to say no to what harms you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If you push her to do this, you will regret it." "It's not a push," I answered. "It's a door." He exhaled through his nose, a bull allowed to pretend gentleness. "You want her to live like you? Counting coupons? Fixing things with tape?" "I want her to hear herself," I said. Whether that leads her into or away from you is not my choice." He looked at Evelyn again, as if daring her to be someone else. "Come back to the table. We'll finish dinner. We'll talk about this like adults tomorrow." Evelyn reached for the closet knob. The coats inside made a sound like leaves when she moved them aside. My jacket hung there, thin, charcoal grey. She took it down and slid it over my shoulders with a tenderness I'd dreamt about for months. Then she reached for her own, camel-coloured, soft, with a belt that never tied tight enough to satisfy her husband. She pulled it on. The envelope in her pocket made a small thump against the fabric when it settled. She turned back to him. "I'm leaving," she said. "Please do not follow me." The plea was its own kind of generosity. He smiled again, the way men smile when they plan to win later. "Be reasonable, Eve." She flinched at the nickname. He never calls her Evelyn when he wants control. I touched her elbow. "I'll get my bag." We walked past him. He did not move aside. We moved around him. My hand brushed the figurine on the entry table, a silver heron with its beak pointed upward. The heron had looked elegant earlier. Now it looked like it might cry out. I reached the door. The cold slid in through the seam like a warning and a blessing. I put my palm on the wood. I thought about the time she was 5, and we left the cabin and she cried because the lake would miss us. "It's water," I had said, laughing. "Water forgets." And she had answered, dead serious, "Not the good kind." Behind us, Martin said, almost gently, "If you walk out that door, Evelyn, you don't walk back into this house the same." Chicago night held its breath. The streetlights made coins on the pavement. Somewhere a neighbor's television laughed for them. A dusting of early snow lined the edges of lawns, the kind you can kick with the side of your shoe and pretend winter isn't actually here. I stepped onto the porch, and the air wrapped my lungs in cold linen. Evelyn followed, pulling the door closed behind us with a care that felt like respect for thresholds. We stood there a second, two people on the edge between a version of our lives and the next one. "Keys," she said, fishing in her pocket, and I remembered how often I had waited for her outside piano lessons, the way she would emerge with sheet music pressed to her chest and say, "I learned something about silence today." The night smelled like chimney smoke and rosemary cuttings. Her car beeped when she unlocked it. The sound looked too bright for the darkness. We moved quickly. Muscle memory moves mothers even when the muscles are older. I helped her into the driver's seat by doing nothing but letting her do it. I slid into the passenger side and closed the door without a slam. I still expected a shout. He didn't call out. Of course he wouldn't. Control doesn't chase. It calculates. It waits for morning, for advisors, for the better angle. He had said, "You won't come back the same. I thought that is the point." Evelyn put the key in the ignition and paused. Her hands were shaking again. She looked at me sideways. "Mum?" "I'm here," I said. The bracelet's knot pressed into my pulse. Headlights washed over the dashboard. Another car pulled into the driveway. The partner from the firm, apologetically trapped by the drama of other people's living room. He waved a small sorry wave and backed out. We pulled onto the street and began to drive. The tires shushed over the thin snow. The turn signals ticked like small clocks, parceling the night into manageable portions. I watched porch after porch pass, each one a separate chapter of other families, other rituals, other wounds wrapped in casseroles. "Why did you keep the envelope so long?" she asked, not angry, just listening to the windshield wipers keep the rhythm. I rested my head against the cool glass. Because I knew that whatever it said would draw a line, and because I wanted to be near you when the line appeared, not on the other side of it. She considered that, then nodded. "Thank you for bringing it. Thank you for opening it." Silence again, the kind that holds. We got onto Lake Shore Drive. The city rose to our right like a system of beliefs, confident and lit. To our left, the black water hid its expressions. Traffic was light. Even cars had chosen dining rooms and televisions and early bedtimes over the sensation of moving away from what is expected. "I never told you," she said, voice low, eyes on the road. "What happened the day he laughed at you the first time?" My jaw tightened. I suspected that was not the first time. "It was 2 years ago. We had a group from the firm for dinner, and he told a story about you mixing up quinoa and couscous, and how charming it is when people from a different world try new things." She swallowed. Everyone laughed. He didn't say your name, but he looked at me, and everyone followed his eyes, and my body understood the shape of the insult. After they left, I told him it was cruel. He said, "It's endearing. Don't be so fragile." He used the word fragile like a weapon. I closed my eyes. "I am sorry." "He's not a monster," she said, surprising me and not. "He just believes that all the rooms belong to him, even the rooms inside my chest." We drove in that sentence for a while. The highway opened, the city shrinking in the rear view like a story we once told and could no longer remember the end of. We crossed into Indiana, the signs laying out the night in bright declarations: state line, speed limit, rest area, coffee. "I thought the baby would fix us," she said, whispering into the dark. "That's a terrible sentence when you say it out loud." "Hope is not terrible," I answered. "Only the bargains we make with it." She laughed softly, an exhausted leaf of sound. Grandma's note. She knew me. "Go to the cabin when you forget who you are." I forget all the time lately. "You remember," I said. "You remembered at the table." She nodded. "Do you think he'll come after us?" "He will consider it," I said. "He will also consider that your grandmother hired a lawyer to phrase that line, free of claim by any spouse. Precisely. He will hate that sentence more than any other." Evelyn smiled without showing teeth. She always liked her sentences tidy. "She liked them true," I said. The highway shouldered us forward. Signs for Michigan began to appear like gentle instructions. Suddenly, my daughter's phone vibrated in the center console. She glanced down. The screen lit her face with blue. His name. We let it ring. It rang again, then again, as if persistence could change facts. Finally, it stopped. A text arrived instead, a bubble that looked harmless and was not. She did not read it. The phone went dark. The car felt lighter. I reached into my coat pocket and touched the edge of the envelope, even though it was in her jacket now. Because years do that to you. Your hands search for old weights. My fingers brushed something else, a smaller folded note I had tucked behind the envelope before we left the house. My handwriting, my unsent apology from a year ago, written the day I found the envelope and did not drive to Evanston. I had written, "I am afraid of losing you to the version of yourself they want." I had written, "I keep forgetting you are not a child. I can walk across the street holding my hand." I did not take it out. I would know when it was time. The dash clock clicked past midnight. Evelyn exhaled, a sound like gratitude's first plank being laid across water. The road narrowed to a two-lane lined with pines. Snow grew thicker on the shoulders. The dark got intimate. "We're really doing this," she said. "We are," I answered. And then as we rounded a curve, a pair of headlights appeared in the mirror, fast, climbing, insistent. They filled the back window until all I could see of the world behind us was bright and white. The headlights clung to us like a question we couldn't answer. They followed too closely, the beam bleaching the edges of Evelyn's hair as she gripped the wheel tighter. The road was empty, except for us and whoever had decided to erase the distance between tail lights and collision. "Mom," she whispered, voice sharp with the effort to sound calm. "Is that—" I turned in my seat. The glare made my eyes water, but the shape of the car was clear enough. A dark SUV, larger than ours, moving with purpose rather than accident. "Yes," I said. Her knuckles whitened. He followed. We had both expected it and prayed against it. I watched the SUV loom, then pull back slightly, then press forward again, an intimidation dance. The kind of maneuver someone uses when they want you to know you're not free yet. "Don't panic," I said, though my pulse was racing. "Keep steady. Don't speed. Just drive." The road cut through dense woods, tall pines like sentinels keeping secrets. Snow dust swirled in the air, and the SUV's high beams made it look like shards of glass in the night. The bracelet on my wrist dug into my skin as I clenched my hand, grounding myself in the thread of a promise. "Why is he doing this?" Evelyn's voice broke. "Because control doesn't let go easily," I said. "But listen, every mile you drive, every decision you make that is yours and not his is already freedom." The SUV surged forward suddenly, so close I thought the bumper might kiss our trunk. Evelyn gasped, steadying the wheel. "Mom, You've driven through worse storms," I reminded her. "Remember when you got your license and we had to drive home from that recital in the blizzard?" She nodded quickly, eyes locked forward. "We spun twice." "And we made it," I said. The SUV swerved slightly, trying to startle her. My stomach lurched, but Evelyn's grip held true. Her breath came in short bursts, but her eyes burned steady on the road. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the SUV slowed. The beams grew smaller in the mirror, shrinking until they were distant fireflies instead of interrogations. My lungs remembered how to work. Evelyn exhaled so sharply it was almost a sob. "Why stop now?" "Because he wanted you to know he could," I answered. "And because he knows where you're going." Her face twisted in pain. "The cabin." "Yes," I whispered. The key in her pocket gleamed when she touched it unconsciously, like a talisman against a storm. She tightened her coat around her, then glanced at me with a courage I recognized from the girl who once stood on a school stage and sang, despite trembling knees. "I don't care if he follows," she said finally. "That place is mine, and when we get there, he won't own a single breath of it." The road stretched ahead like a line into another life. But behind us, somewhere in the dark, a man with too much pride and too much money was still calculating. I wondered, when he arrived, because he would, what truth would finally break this open? The cabin appeared just after dawn, crouched among the birches like it had been waiting all these years. The paint was peeled, the shutters sagged slightly, but it stood, stubborn, weathered, unbending. The gravel crunch under the tires sounded like an exhale that belonged to generations before us. Evelyn cut the engine. Silence draped itself over us. The forest smelled of pine and earth, of rot and renewal in equal measure. Snow had settled softly on the roof, the chimney dark with years of unlit winters. She opened her door slowly, boots sinking into the thin snow. She touched the cabin with her eyes before she touched it with her hands. "I remember the swing," she whispered. It was still there, half-rusted chains, the plank seat tilted, but the outline of her childhood remained. I remembered her 5-year-old laughter filling this clearing, my mother watching from the porch with a mug of coffee saying, "Let her swing higher. She'll learn balance." We walked up the creaking steps. Evelyn pulled the key from her pocket and held it for a long moment, staring. "It feels heavier now," she said. "Because it means something," I told her. She slid it into the lock. The door stuck, just as the letter had said. She pressed harder, shoulder against the wood, until it gave with a sigh. Inside smelled of cedar and dust, a combination that carried my mother's breath like an afterthought. Light filtered through lace curtains yellowed with time. The furniture was modest. Wooden chairs, a faded rug, a bookshelf still holding novels from the 1970s. On the mantel above the cold fireplace, a jar of seashells gathered from the lake. Evelyn stood in the middle of the room, turning slowly, as if reacquainting herself with a language she had once spoken fluently but forgotten. "It feels like she's here." "She is," I said, my throat thick. "Every corner." She set the envelope on the table. Her fingers brushed it like one brushes a relic in a church. She whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." We spent the morning opening shutters, sweeping dust, lighting a fire that struggled before catching. The cabin began to breathe again, wood popping with warmth, air shifting from stale to alive. Evelyn's cheeks flushed with heat, her eyes brighter than I'd seen them in years. And then, through the window, I saw it. The SUV. Parked at the end of the gravel drive, half hidden by trees but unmistakable. My stomach dropped. Evelyn followed my gaze and froze. Her lips parted, her hand tightening on the back of a chair until her knuckles were white. "He found us," she whispered. I put my hand over hers. He was always going to. We watched the driver's door open. His figure emerged, tall, deliberate, the forest bending around him as though it had no choice. He adjusted his coat, scanned the cabin, and began walking toward us with a pace that was neither hurried nor hesitant. The fire crackled behind us, a heartbeat we could not trust. Evelyn inhaled sharply, then exhaled, standing taller. She reached into her pocket and touched the key again. "This time," she said, her voice steady, He doesn't get to tell the story. But I wondered as his shadow grew across the snow, what story would she choose instead? His footsteps crunched closer, deliberate as a metronome. Evelyn didn't move from the window. She stood like the girl who once refused to come inside during a thunderstorm, arms folded, daring the sky to strike. I placed myself beside her, though my knees trembled. Together, we watched him cross the clearing. Martin stopped at the porch steps. His hands were bare despite the cold, his wedding ring catching the pale light. He smiled, calm, rehearsed, dangerous in its certainty. "Quite the adventure," he said. His voice carried too easily in the crisp air. A midnight escape, a road trip, a rundown cabin in the woods. How cinematic. Evelyn opened the door before I could stop her. The wood groaned. Cold air rushed in, mixing with the smoke of the fire. "This is my place," she said, clear and sharp. "You don't belong here." He tilted his head, studying her. "Evelyn, listen to yourself. You sound like a teenager slamming doors. Be serious. We have lives, responsibilities." She stepped forward onto the porch. The boards creaked under her weight, but she didn't flinch. "I am serious for the first time in a long time." His eyes flicked to me, narrowing. "And you," whispering in her ear, dragging her back into some romanticized version of poverty. "Do you think that will save her?" "I think," I said evenly, "that silence has cost her enough already." He laughed softly. "Silence? She has everything. Money, home, a future that people would kill for. You mistake gratitude for silence." Evelyn shook her head. "You mistake control for love." The words hit harder than the wind. Martin's smile faltered, the first crack in his armor. He stepped up one stair, then another, until he was almost eye level with her. "You're upset," he said carefully. "You lost the baby. You're grieving. You need stability, not this." Her breath hitched, but she didn't break. "Don't use my grief to keep me in your cage." He froze, caught. "You knew?" he asked, voice dropping. "Yes," she said. "My mother knows. The clinic knows. And now everyone knows, because you wouldn't let me have the dignity of saying it myself." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. His jaw tightened, fists clenching at his sides. For the first time I saw not the polished investor, not the charming host, but the man beneath. Angry, cornered, stripped of applause. "You think this place makes you strong," he spat. "It makes you foolish. Walking away from everything we built, everything I gave you." "You didn't give me anything," she cut in, voice rising with a power that startled even her. "I worked, I loved, I carried, and I lost. None of that is yours to brand with your name." The birches rustled, a wind bending them toward her. I thought of my mother, of her handwriting, of the key that fit the back door, because the front always stuck. I thought of how she had left this place not for me, but for my daughter, as if she had known Evelyn would one day need a geography of her own. Martin stared at her, chest rising and falling like a tide he couldn't control. Then quietly he said, "If you walk back into that cabin, Evelyn, you'll regret it." She held his gaze, the firelight flickering behind her. "If I don't," she whispered, "I already regret everything." She turned and stepped back inside, closing the door softly, firmly, without trembling. And for the first time in years, Martin Whitmore stood on a porch with no audience, no stage, and no script that could save him. But I knew this wasn't over. His silence now was not surrender. It was strategy. He did not step back when the door closed. He planted himself on the porch like a monument to inevitability. His breath rose in small clouds and vanished, a trick I wished pain would learn. I could feel Evelyn's shoulders tighten next to me. The fire behind us cracked sharply, a sap pocket exploding in the log like a held-in shout. He knocked once, the sound heavy and sure. "Open the door, Evelyn." Not a plea, not a question, an instruction. She kept her hand on the knob without turning it. "You are not welcome inside. I am your husband. You are a man on my porch." His mouth pressed into a thin line. A muscle in his cheek jumped. "Fine," he said, muffling the chill with that old, practiced smoothness. "Let's keep this simple. You come home. We regroup. We talk to Dr. Greeley about next steps. We show your mother we are capable adults who don't flee to fairy tale cabins." She laughed once. It had no joy in it. "I didn't flee. I chose." He leaned closer to the glass, watching her through it. "You lost a child, Evelyn." Her hand flickered on the knob. "Don't use our child to hurt me." He glanced past her at me. "Do you hear how she talks now? Like a script you wrote for her?" I took a breath and found a steadiness I hadn't known I still had. "I wrote nothing. I barely said 2 true sentences at your table, and you called them relics." He shifted tactics, as men do when one angle fails. "This property," he said, voice cooling into something like business, "will require upkeep, taxes. You'll want insurance, a legal review of the deed." I brought papers. He lifted a leather folio I hadn't noticed, embossed with his firm's initials. "We can consolidate. Make it efficient. This doesn't have to be dramatic." Evelyn's jaw hardened. "Grandma structured it so I could be dramatic if I wanted." She slipped the chain on the door. A thin gesture, but it calmed something in me. She wrote, "Free of claim by any spouse present or future." He smiled with a patience that wasn't patience. "Deeds can be interpreted. Judges can be persuaded. You're emotional. I'm trying to protect you from yourself." The fire exhaled, a small sigh. The cabin smelled like cedar and defiance. A car engine rolled somewhere in the trees. For a second, I thought he had come with reinforcements, one of those quiet lawyers with quiet suits. But when the headlights cut through the birches, an old brown pickup eased into view. Its door swung open with a squeal that had known winters. A figure climbed down, sturdy, wrapped in a green wool coat, knit cap low over grey hair. The person raised a mittened hand. "Morning," she called. Her voice was the kind that had spent years outdoors and still liked people. "Anyone need help with the gate? It tends to stick." Evelyn's face lit with the mild shock of being seen without judgment. She peered through the window. "Hello," she called back, cautious and grateful. "We're okay." The woman climbed the porch steps with the ease of someone who knew every creak. She looked at Martin, at the leather folio, at the fire through the lace curtains, then at Evelyn's hand on the door chain. She tilted her head, reading the room like a map. "You must be Evelyn," she said, eyes kind. "I'm Mabel Hart. Your grandmother asked me to keep an eye on the place. I brought the spare keys and the note she left with me in case you ever came." Martin straightened, annoyed by the interruptions of ordinary goodness. "This is a private matter," he said. Mabel's smile didn't move. "So is the property line," she answered. "And you're on the wrong side of it." Evelyn unlatched the chain and opened the door just enough. "You knew my grandmother?" 50 years, Mabel said, stepping in only when Evelyn stepped back. "We swapped jam and stories. She was truthful to a fault and hated cheap nails." She tapped the doorframe. "These are the good kind. This house will outlast all of us if we let it." She slid a small tin from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. It rattled with metal. Then she unfolded a short letter, the paper soft from having been read more than once. "For you," Mabel said. "She told me to wait until you arrived in your own time. She said you wouldn't come if anyone pressed you." I met the older woman's eyes. She had my mother's brand of gentleness, the kind that never apologized for standing firm. Evelyn's fingers shook as she took the note. She didn't look at Martin. She didn't look at me. She looked at the lines, mouth moving a little as she read silently, tears gathering and holding like dew. "What does it say?" Martin asked, too soon. Evelyn didn't answer. She folded the note carefully and slid it into the envelope with the key. Then she lifted the tin and shook it. The sound of keys, many of them, rang like a handful of tiny bells. She smiled just barely. "Back door shed, padlock for the dock, attic, pantry," she said. "It's like a language." Mabel nodded. "Your grandmother believed in backups. She also asked me to tell you something if your husband arrived with papers and ideas." Martin laughed once. "This is farcical." Mabel's eyes didn't leave Evelyn's. She said, "Remind my granddaughter that a boundary is a kindness to the future." And she asked me to call Sheriff Dundee if anyone tried to argue property on the porch. Evelyn inhaled, and the breath steadied her. "Could you call him?" she asked, voice calm. Mabel pulled a phone from her pocket. Already did when I saw the folio. Martin's smile kinked. Sheriff Dundee is a friend, he understands reason. He'll tell you this behavior is irrational. In my experience, Mabel said, the sheriff understands property lines. He looked from one woman to another, calculating new math. He settled on me like I was the softest variable. Nora, talk sense into her. I reached for the bracelet at my wrist. The red thread had faded into memory's rust. Sense, I said, is a house with both a front and a back door. You kept her at the front for years because it stuck. She's using the back now. That's still a door. He opened his mouth to argue, but tires crunched again at the edge of the clearing. A county cruiser rolled into view, lights off, the morning blue enough without them. A tall man in a brown jacket stepped out, hat low, hands unhurried. He looked at the three of us on the porch, at the smoke curling from the chimney, at Mabel standing like a one-woman union, and he nodded. "Morning, folks," Sheriff Dundee said. "Who needs me to measure a line?" The sheriff had the weathered patience of men who know arguments before they hear them. He climbed the steps and tipped his hat to Mabel, then to Evelyn, then to me. His nod to Martin was smaller, not disrespectful, just not dazzled. "Miss Evelyn," he said gently, "this place is yours?" She handed him the envelope containing her grandmother's letter. She did not hand it to Martin. Dundee read without hurry, lips still. When he finished, he returned it, eyes warm. "Clear as lake ice," he said. "Title's yours. They're a complaint I should be hearing." Martin smiled his cultivated smile. "Sheriff, I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here to bring my wife home. There are circumstances. She's in grief. She's not thinking clearly." Dundee's expression didn't move. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said to Evelyn first. "I'm also sorry for any man who thinks grief makes a person incompetent." Color rose in Martin's face. "I'm not implying—" "You were," Dundee said mildly. "How about we cut to the question that brought me out here on a cold morning? Are you invited inside, sir?" Martin glanced at the open door, at the warm glow he hadn't earned. "As her husband, that wasn't the question," Dundee said, voice still gentler than steel and somehow stronger. "Ma'am?" He looked at Evelyn. She lifted her chin. "He is not invited in." "Then here's the law of this county," Dundee said, settling his hat with one finger. "A person who is not invited to cross a threshold does not cross. If they insist, I can escort them off the property and recommend they work out their marriage someplace where wood and memory aren't part of the argument." Mabel's mouth twitched like she might just smile. Martin's did not. "Think about optics, Sheriff," Martin said softly. "That tone, the one reserved for deals and warnings. Is that how you want to be known, as the man who kept a husband from his grieving wife?" Dundee didn't blink. "I'd be the man who followed the law and protected a woman's yes and no. I sleep fine in that story." He turned to Evelyn again. "Would you like him to leave on his own, or would you like me to make it official?" Evelyn looked at me. I didn't move. This was her line to draw. Her finger brushed the key in her pocket like a rosary. "I want him to leave," she said. "On his own would be better. But I want him to leave." The sheriff nodded once, a promise. He looked back at Martin. "You heard her." Martin's eyes flicked between the faces in front of him, a chess player realizing the board had changed pieces overnight. The folio in his hand looked foolish here, leather sweating under the grey sky. For a moment, just one, I saw his fear. Not of the law, not of scandal, but of emptiness, of not being the voice in the room. It softened me, and then hardened me again. "I will leave," he said, measuring each syllable. "But make no mistake." He looked at Evelyn, and the words turned from polished to raw. "You think I am the enemy because I want more for us than this. A cabin full of ghosts, a mother who counts blessings like coupons. You think defiance is freedom. It isn't. It's a bridge to nowhere." Evelyn's voice was quiet and ferocious at once. "It's a bridge to myself." He blew out a breath, set the folio on the porch rail like a flag no one wanted, and stepped backward down the stairs. "You will regret choosing them over me," he said. Not to the sheriff, not to Mabel, not to the trees, straight to the center of my daughter's chest. When the world stops clapping and the bills come due, you'll wish you'd taken the hand that knows how to hold a pen over dotted lines. He turned and walked toward the SUV, boots punching prints into the thin snow. He didn't look back. He didn't slam the door. He simply drove away, competence wrapped around injury like gauze. We watched the tail lights disappear between the birches. The quiet that followed was not peace yet. It was possibility. Dundee tipped his hat again. "If he comes back uninvited, call," he said. "Mabel's got my number. You need anything. Firewood, plumber, a guy who knows what to do with a temperamental chimney. I have cousins." He smiled and left without fuss, footsteps confident in a world that still held rules. Mabel lingered. "There's stew on my stove if you two get tired of figuring all this out on an empty stomach," she said. "And there's one more thing." She pulled another folded paper from the inside of her coat, a small square, newer than the others, written in my mother's ink but with my name on the outside, Nora. I stared at the letters until they blurred. She left me something else. My voice betrayed me. All the years of being the one who holds while no one holds you. "Asked me to give it to you when Evelyn had arrived and stood on her own feet," Mabel said. "Told me you'd know why the timing mattered." My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was short, like a breath carried across a room. "Nora, if you find yourself afraid to hand our girl the key to her own life, remember this. I kept this cabin not because I loved the past, but because I wanted you both to have a future that no man could sell. Forgive me for all the ways I taught you scarcity. It was never about dollars. It was about scarcity of permission. Unlearn it. When your wrist aches, retie the thread. Mother." I looked at my bracelet. The knot, worn to a memory, had loosened. I ran my thumb over it and felt the softness of years. Evelyn's hand slid into mine. We stood like that for a long time, two women in a doorway, the cold at our backs, the warmth at our faces, the keys singing when Mabel's tin rattled as she picked it up. "One last thing," Mabel said at the threshold, eyes kind. "Folks around here don't always say sorry the right way. They mend fences and show up with soup. Your grandmother believed in the kind of apology that sets a table and leaves a seat empty for the one who hurt you until they're ready to be human. You decide whether to keep that seat. That's not on them, that's on you." She stepped off the porch and was gone, her boots writing a path we could follow later if we needed pie and advice. Evelyn touched the jar of shells on the mantel. "She kept the good ones," she whispered. "She kept the broken ones too," I said, pointing to a small scallop with a missing corner. "Look at that. She thought even chips could be holy." Evelyn laughed, a sound that finally had some warmth in it. She went to the kitchen and ran water until the pipes gave in and responded. The cabin began to sound like a place that remembered how to live. I stood alone for a moment, holding my mother's note. I reached for the bracelet. The knot gave with a tiny sigh, thread loosening between my fingers. I felt bare, and then, almost immediately, free. I retied it, tighter, making a small new knot beside the old. It looked like a scar and a decision. From the window, I could see the SUV had stopped at the end of the lane. A figure stood by the driver's door, phone to his ear, head bowed in a way I had not seen before, not in prayer exactly, but not in victory either. And I wondered, when truth starts to melt the shape of a life, who has the courage to step into what's left? We ate Mabel's stew at the wooden table that had remembered elbows for half a century. Steam rose like a blessing. The first spoonful burned my tongue, and the pain felt right, a small honest hurt. Evelyn ate slowly, eyes unfocused, the way people look when the past and future are arguing, and the present is just trying to keep them from breaking chairs. "I kept thinking," she said quietly, "that if I behaved better, he would be kinder. That if I said thank you more, if I bought the right dress for the right party, if I laughed at the right jokes, the sharp edges would sand down. He isn't cruel every day. He just believes the world is a company and he is the CEO." She placed her spoon down, and I was an employee who should be grateful for employment. I reached across and touched her wrist. The new knot on my bracelet caught the light, red and stubborn. "Gratitude is a beautiful thing," I said. "Indenture is not." She looked at my wrist and smiled. "You retied it." "Your grandmother told me to." She nodded. "She told me, to retie my life. We washed bowls by hand because the dishwasher was a rumor. The window above the sink framed the birches and a slice of lake that winked through. Wind hummed around the corners. Inside, the fire cracked, an old friend talking to itself. "Mom," she said, drying a bowl with the towel my mother embroidered long ago. Blue thread faded to grey. "I need to tell you something harder than the baby." I turned, bracing without flinching. "Tell me." She held the towel to her chest like a shield, and then let it drop. "I thought I wanted a child because I wanted to be a mother. But when I lost the baby, the grief that ate me wasn't only for the child. It was for the part of me that had traded my voice for a future someone else chose. I don't know if I want a child, or if I wanted a solution." The honesty made my eyes sting. "You don't owe the world a reason for your life," I said. "You owe your life your life." She laughed at the awkwardness of the sentence, and then let the laughter become a small sob. I stepped forward. We stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding each other the way you hold someone when you know the room might fall apart, and you plan to be the thing that doesn't. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," she whispered into my shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't knock louder," I whispered back. A sound outside broke our quiet, the crunch of footsteps on snow. Not careful, not threatening, human. We looked at each other, the same question passing between us without words. I opened the door. Martin stood on the path, hatless, red-eared, the folio gone, hands empty. He looked smaller in the morning than he ever did in those rooms with chandeliers and speeches. He did not step onto the porch. He stayed on the ground, snow sinking around his dress shoes. "I came back," he said, "without ideas or papers." Evelyn didn't say anything. Neither did I. He rubbed his palms together as if remembering he had a body. "I called my mother," he said, surprised by his own sentence. "She told me something I didn't want to hear." He looked up, eyes raw. "She said she married a man like me and called it love. She said it took her 30 years to decide she could forgive him without staying." The wind moved through the birches with a sound like pages turning. "I have been—" He searched for a word that didn't make him the villain in his own story. "Arrogant. I built a life where every door opened when I pushed, and I forgot that other people live in those rooms." He swallowed. "I mocked your empty plate because I thought gratitude was a performance I was owed, even from your mother." His gaze found mine, and for the first time the look did not ask me to be smaller. "Nora," he said, my name coming out like a new language. "I'm not ready to apologize for everything. I don't even know how yet, but I can apologize for that, for the plate. It was cruelty dressed as wit. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was not enough to mend years, but it was a beginning that did not center his power, and I felt something in my chest loosen. Evelyn stepped to the edge of the porch, warded by the rail. "I am not coming home with you," she said, voice steady as the lake in winter. "I don't know if I will at all. I need to know who I am when I'm not being measured." He nodded, pain rippling his face. "I don't know who I am if I'm not in control," he admitted, and the admission stole his heat. "I need to find out." "Without me as your practice field," she said. He closed his eyes. "Without you as my practice field," he repeated. He opened them again and looked at the cabin. "She left you a house that tells the truth," he said to Evelyn. "I have always been afraid of houses that tell the truth." We stood in a triangle that felt like a geometry problem none of us had wanted, but all of us needed to solve. The cold edged under my coat. The bracelet itched like a question. "I'm going to leave now," he said. "I'll have our attorney pause everything, transactions, PR, all of it. I'll tell the firm I'm taking time. I'll call Dr. Greeley and tell her to speak only to you. No more gatekeeping." He almost smiled at his own too-on-the-nose choice of words, and then didn't. "I don't know if you'll forgive me. I don't know if you should. But I wanted you to hear me try, without a room watching." He turned, took 2 steps, then stopped and looked back. "If you ever sell this place," he said softly, "don't do it because it's practical. Do it because you're done listening to what it has to say." He walked away, footprints closing slowly as the wind moved snow into them. We watched until the trees took him in like weather. Evelyn sank onto the top step. I sat beside her, joints complaining like old radios. The lake made a low sound beyond the trees, ice speaking in a language that was not quite crack and not quite song. "I don't know what forgiveness is," she said, eyes on the path. "I only know I want to stop carrying him in my throat." "It might be this," I said, letting air back in, "even if he doesn't deserve it." She looked at me. "Do you forgive him?" "I forgive myself first," I answered. "For thinking your love for him meant there was no room left for me. For turning every holiday into a test I kept failing. For waiting 18 months to give you an envelope because I was afraid of your answer." She nodded, thoughtful. "I forgive myself for stepping around my own no." We sat until our hands went cold, and then went back inside to build a fire that would last all afternoon. The cabin warmed around us, heat finding corners it had ignored for years. On the mantel, the jar of shells caught the light. One lay on top, smooth and white with a single line of rose through the center like a healed cut. I picked it up and pressed it into Evelyn's palm. "For when your chest forgets," I said. She curled her fingers around it. "And for when it remembers too much," she answered. The phone buzzed on the table, a text from an unknown number. She opened it and laughed, tears in her eyes. "Mabel," she said. "She says, 'The lake keeps secrets but not lies. Supper at 6. Bring stories.'" We would go. We would listen to old women tell true things and teach our mouths how to speak them. But before supper, before anything else, Evelyn lifted my wrist. "May I?" she asked. I nodded. She untied the new knot, then tied two. One for what I had held too long, one for what I was willing to hold now. The thread cut lightly into my skin, a tender bite. Wind shouldered the birches. The fire breathed. The cabin waited, patient as a heartbeat. And from the edge of the trees, as the light thinned, a figure appeared again at the lane. No SUV this time, just a man on foot, hat in hand, carrying nothing but cold and the possibility of a sentence that might start with, "I was wrong." He stopped far from the porch where the path opens like a palm. He did not wave. He did not speak. He simply stood until we noticed, and when we did, he lifted one hand a few inches, as if asking permission to come closer, not to the cabin, but to the moment. Evelyn stepped outside, coat collar up against the cold. I followed, but stayed back, giving the air between them a chance to arrange itself into something other than trial. Martin's voice carried softly. "The sheriff told me about Mabel's stew," he said, almost smiling at the oddity of the sentence. "He said it makes men tell the truth." He took a breath that shuddered and steadied. "I wanted to say one more thing before I go quiet for as long as you need." Evelyn waited, neither inviting nor dismissing. "I laughed at your mother's empty plate because I needed to make someone small to feel big," he said. "I see that now. It wasn't about food, it was about fear. I built a life where I never had to be hungry, and I hated anyone who reminded me what hunger looks like." He glanced at me, then back at her. "I am sorry. For that. For so much more I don't have words for yet. I don't expect you to forgive me today. Or ever. I only ask that when you do what you must with your life, you don't do it with my voice in your head." He swallowed, and his breath ghosted out in the cold. "I'm going to speak to someone," he added, embarrassed by the admission. "A therapist. That's a sentence I've sold to other people and never bought for myself." Evelyn's lips parted and closed. The lake made a sound like a distant door opening. "Thank you for saying that," she said, and the words were not absolution, but neither were they a slammed gate. "We will not have children to fix us." He nodded. "I know." He looked at me once more. "Nora," he began, and then his mouth failed him. He tried again. "Thank you for feeding my wife when I fed her attention." I had not expected to cry. I did anyway. A tight, clean release. "Attention is a snack," I said. "It doesn't keep." He almost smiled. "No," he said. "It doesn't." He put on his hat. He lifted his hand again, a small benediction none of us would have predicted from the man who made rooms bend. Then he turned and walked the long path back to the road, boots making a rhythm that sounded, for the first time, less like leaving and more like beginning. Evelyn stood still until the trees swallowed him whole. Then she exhaled, a sound that felt like a house opening its windows after a long winter. She looked at me, cheeks flushed, eyes clear. "I don't know what happens next." "We do the next right small thing," I said. "We make a list, we call the clinic ourselves, we call a lawyer who understands women, we split the wood, we go to Mabel's at 6. We sleep." She nodded, relief and terror braided together. "And after that?" "We watch for what the lake says when it freezes," I said. "We learn its language." Inside, we wrote letters we had been afraid to write. Evelyn wrote to herself first, "Dear girl, you are not a performance." I wrote to my mother, "You were right about the back door." We stacked them in the drawer beside the matches where small things begin and keep us warm. We spoke of practicals. She would stay a while. I would go back to the city to water plants, to tell my small life that it still mattered. We would trade weeks like recipes. We would make the cabin ours by using it. As the afternoon thinned into blue, I took the jar of shells from the mantel and poured them onto the table. We sorted them, whole, broken, almost but not quite. Evelyn laughed when she found one shaped like a heart with a crack through it. She set it aside for Mabel. I slipped a smooth white one into my pocket for Martin, not to give him now, not to reward or erase, but as a promise to myself that my forgiveness would be a verb and not a crown, something I might hand over one quiet day when he had earned the weight of it by carrying his own. We lit the lantern outside the door, the one my mother had hung for nights when she came back late from the dock. Its light cut a small circle into the growing dark. Before we left for Mabel's, Evelyn tugged my wrist. "One more knot," she said. I held out my arm. Her fingers moved slow and sure. She tied a third knot into the bracelet, 3 bright bumps against old thread. Past, present, choice. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The lake?" "No," she said, smiling a little. "The quiet." I listened. There it was. Not silence that punished, but quiet that allowed. The soft tick of the cooling stove, the pine's winter breath, the far-off groan of ice deciding who it would be this year, the house answering us with its own small sounds, as if happy to be necessary again. We stepped onto the porch. Snow began to fall, thin at first, then almost confident. It landed on my hair, on her eyelashes, on the railing my mother had sanded back when hope was a manual task. We pulled our coats close. We left the door unlocked, a boldness and a faith. At the edge of the trees, the world bent blue and silver. It felt like standing at the lip of a story I had been trying to write my whole life and finally finding the first true line. "I forgive him," Evelyn said quietly, startling herself. She touched her pocket, the key there like a heartbeat. "Not for him, for me. Forgiveness is not returning. It's releasing." I nodded, throat burning clean. "I forgive him differently," I said. "I forgive him by not waiting at tables hungry for praise he will never give without a bill." We walked toward the path that would deliver us to Stu and Mabel and the kind of talk that doesn't wound. Snow gathered on our boots. The lantern hummed. Somewhere far off, a car door closed. Not his, someone else's life continuing with all its ordinary dignity. At the bend, Evelyn stopped and turned back to look at the cabin. Her cabin, lantern glowing like a held breath. "I'll invite him here someday," she said, surprising us both. "When my voice is strong enough to greet him without shaking. He can sit on the step. He can keep his hat on. He can apologize in the language he's learned by then." "And if he doesn't?" I asked. She smiled, not cruel, not resigned. "Free. Then the lake will still freeze, and we will still eat stew, and the house will still stand." We started walking again. The snow sang its small, relentless song. The birches whispered a history that belongs to women who put down paper and pick up keys. The bracelet's 3 knots warmed against my skin. And beneath our steps, the thin ice on a puddle cracked with a sound like a spine aligning, sharp, then right, reminding me that mending is noisy and beautiful, and never the end of anything, only the beginning we've been afraid to allow.